The discovery of gold encouraged migration to the west for the treasures of gold and silver. Many became miners who risked their lives mining, and half the population of these people were foreign-born, which created a further conflict due to the native-born racist ideals. The Chinese Exclusion Act was made, which prevented the Chinese to immigrate to America. The mining industry hurt foreigners in the end, but also Native Americans by encroaching upon and seizing their land in search for gold.
I'm gonna get the last of this gold if it's the last thing I do.
Thanks to the Homestead Act, I can get 160 acres of land in the western states just for me. Look, I love
The Homestead Act of 1862 promised 160 acres of free public land to any family willing to go west for 5 years.
But it's dry. How are you going to farm on that?
This attracted many settlers, native-born and immigrants, to the Great Plains, although they found that the land was dry with no lumber and little water, so it was hard for these pioneers to survive on the plain. Due to the vast stretches of grassland in Texas, cowboys were able to herd cattle, which opened up a new market for meat in the East. Many of these cowboys were Mexican and African Americans, but as beef prices fell and the cold winter hit, the drives ended and so did the cowboys. The invention of barbed wire by Joseph Glidden helped with the separation of land, but hurt the cattle frontier by cutting off open areas with the new fencing. The westward movement came to an end when the entire frontier had been settled on. Frederick Jackson Turner argued his thesis that the frontier was a positive for America with its social and political democracy, created challenges, and more individualism. The end meant less rural and farming and more industrialization for America. This was not only the end for settlers, but Native Americans too, because there was no more land to push the Indians westward. During the late 19th century settlement, miners and homesteaders had turned to violence when taking native land. There was a round of Indian wars, including the nullifying of treaties previously made with the tribes, and ambushing of Little Big Horn, and the killing of many Indian buffalo. The last resistance from the Indians was the religious ghost dance movement, which led to many natives dead, including children, and an overall end of all Indian wars in America. The end of the wars was the reformers' chance to civilize the natives into white society and divide their lands, which meant the termination of their tribes. This was the final act of destroying Indian culture, known as the Dawes Severity Act of 1887. Helen Hunt Jackson wrote a book describing the poor treatment of the natives, which created mixed feelings about the ending of all Indian tribes. This publication was called The Century of Dishonor. The closing of the frontier had Americans concerned about the preservation of nature and public land. John Muir, a preservationist, created the Sierra Club to preserve nature from humans.
Are you part of the Sierra Club? We're protecting the nature of the United States before it's too late. Think about your children, your grandchildren, and all future generations. Save the trees! Save the trees!
Agriculture took a turn when crop prices fell and monopolies were forming trusts to keep their industries intact. Farmers, on the other hand, got hurt and formed the National Grain Movement to protect them and their families from big businesses. This time frame had a huge gap between the rich and poor, with farmers being on the low end and the Titans ruling the high side. An increase in immigration caused a large increase in the American population. Immigrants were driven to America by religious persecution, overcrowded lands, and poverty in their home country. Although immigration also occurred prior to the Civil War, the type of immigrants arriving were vastly different.
I'm a new immigrant. I do not speak English, I'm not Protestant, and I moved to crowded cities such as Chicago or New York City.
I am an old immigrant. I am of Protestant faith, I speak English, and I am from either Germany or Ireland.
The surplus of immigration led to a series of anti-immigrant ideas and actions, such as the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which purely excluded the Chinese, as well as restrictions on undesirable immigrants through Ellis Island. Ellis Island was the most popular immigration site at this time period.
Ellis Island. Hey, look!
The Statue of Liberty, a common symbol of hope in the eyes of immigrants.
People began moving from the country to dense cities as farm jobs became less desirable than industrial or commerce jobs.
What do you mean? I sure would love to move to the city. So many job opportunities in the field of unskilled labor.
There were both positive and negative effects to the expanding
Look at these
cities.
huge skyscrapers in all these American cities as the towns begin to expand upward. Wow. Wow.
Well, on the negative side of urbanization, when you put too many people in just one city, housing becomes an issue. Ghettos formed which were overcrowded, diseases infested, and crime-ridden. It was not uncommon for there to be 6 to 12 people living in just one small apartment. Ew, where do I put this?
As far as politics go, political parties in major cities came under the control of tightly organized groups of politicians known as political machines. Additionally, urban problems led to a series of reform movements within the country. One of the movements, caused by books of social criticism, led the country away from laissez-faire and toward greater government regulation.
Hello, fellow civilian. What are you doing?
Oh, well, I'm just reading Progress and Poverty by Henry George. On a completely unrelated note, we should give greater government regulation over economics.
Another reform that took place was the institution of settlement houses, which were houses ran by educated volunteers to educate immigrants, children, teach industrial arts, and establish neighborhood theaters and music schools. One of the most important reforms was the implication of the social gospel. The social gospel was important because it applied Christian principle to social problems. Interestingly, there was a sharp decline in birth rates from 1820 to 1920.
Why in tarnation would I have more kitties if I can't use them for labor purposes on my farm? Here in the city, there is way more financial burden that comes along with making babies.
The last movement that took place was the women's suffrage. Women gained rights, and Wyoming became the first state to grant full suffrage to women. This contributed to the temperance movement, which promoted complete abstinence from alcohol to avoid the detrimental consequences it had on home and family. These changes impacted all areas of American life, including education.
For a child attending public school, we base our education off McCuffey readers, and most of our finding is supported by tax dollars. Now that I'm old enough for college, I'm going to seek a higher education as the number of colleges in the United States reach an all-time high.
There was a large reform in the education system, making it easier for the common man to get a new education, especially with teaching new immigrants how to speak English. Additionally, there was vast efforts in the women's rights movement, leading to the temperance movement. Alcohol is destroying families and ruining home life. End alcohol usage in America! End alcohol usage in America! Save the families!
The quicker spread of information made the reforms more effective.
Hi, my name's William Randolph Hearst, and I created the first newspaper chain, which makes it faster and easier to get the news.
American writers and artists responded to the urban changes in many diverse ways. The most common attempted to express American style through art, literature, and music. American painters put an emphasis on realism, and as cities grew, more music was created to satisfy the population. That's why music such as jazz, ragtime, and blues gained popularity.
During 1890 to 1912, immigration, industrialization, and urbanization all caused major changes in the United States during what was called the Progressive Era.
Hey, did you see what Rockefeller's doing to his workers and how he made his money?
Yeah, I'm so glad I'm not one of these workers. They barely make any money and have no time off.
Additionally, women played a big role in resisting child labor, so they didn't have just as poor health as their fathers.
I barely have any hours and I get overworked. I get no pay.
Women only work 10-hour workdays. That's constitutional and fair.
Women also played a big role in temperance movements across America, as well as dancing, fighting for equal rights. During this time period, progressive governors fought against big businesses controlling the government. After the war, the South was called the Solid South because most of it was Democrats and there were very few Republicans.
Hey, I'm from Wisconsin and I'm fed up with these big businesses. I think we should regulate public utilities, take on the railroad industry, and adapt political and tax reforms. Who's with me?
I agree. We're sick of these businesses running our lives.
These farmers that were sick of the big businesses created the Populist Party. This led to the Australian or secret ballot in America, where there were no longer influence on who to vote for by the ballot box keepers. This let them pick who they wanted to vote for directly, as well creating the 17th Amendment.
This is all about the rights we have as workers, Alyssa. You should read it.
Okay. Wow. The way we work is so unfair, and our food is so unsafe. This book has really changed my perspective. Hello, my name is William Jennings Bryan, and I am your Democratic representative in the election of 1896. I want free silver for easier access to money for farmers and people of the lower class like you. Vote for me.
I agree. I'm from the Greenback Party, and I think we should have less monopolists and give the power to the lower class. Let's hear it for farmers.
Despite Bryan's efforts, he still lost in the 1896 election to William McKinley. McKinley was supported by big businesses and monopolists. Thank you for watching this week's episode of The Men Who Built America.
Wow.
As a child attending a public school, we base our education off of McFuffy.
All right, go. And walk back. Ready? 1 and 2.
And pose.
Ready, go. I am an old immigrant. I'm of Protestant faith.
I'll go.
And I have to die.